Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Rohaya binti Abdul Rahim with metric number AS11808. Okay, Assalamualaikum and good morning. Today my friends and I will present about the community development and dynamic of an ecosystem. So this is our group members. So for the ecological succession. So ecological succession is a change within a community involving a series of species replacement. So there are two types of ecological succession, which is primary succession and secondary succession. So the primary succession is the formation of soil from the exposed rock due to the wind, water, and abiotic factors. So usually it's occur in area where there is no base soil. For example, volcanic eruption and glacial retreat. So there is example for the primary succession. In this first diagram, there are lichen and mosses invade the area left vacant by the retreating glaciers. In this diagram, there are small bushes grow in the newly abundant soils. In this, there are low tree stage, which show the fast-growing elder tree that help build the soil nutrients and water contents. So this the high tree stage. So for the secondary succession, which is disturbance-based succession, in which there are progressive change from grasses to the shrub to a mixture of shrub and trees. It occur in area where the soil is already present. So for example, the gutative field return to a natural state. Pioneer species. Pioneer species is the first producer to inhabit a community after a disturbance. So it's also the first species that begin the secondary successions. So let's look in this diagram. So the initial state begins with the small, short-lived species and then proceed through the stage of species mid-size and leaf span until finally the large, long-lived species of tree predominate. So there is an example for the secondary succession. Moving to the model of succession. So in 1916, F. E. Clements proposed that the succession in a particular area will always lead to a mature and stable community, which he called a climax community. In climax community, each group of species prepare the way for the next. Grass, shrub, forest development occurs in a sequential way. So this is called as the climax theory. Climax theory is known as the facilitation model of succession. There are also another model, which is inhibition model. An inhibition model also has been proposed to help explain the succession. So it used to predict the colonies hold on their space and inhibit the growth of another plants until the colonies die or are damaged. So another model is tolerance model. Tolerance model predict the different types of plant can colonize an area at the same time. Sure chance determine which seed arrives first, and the successional stage may simply reflect the length of time it takes species to be mature. Next, dynamic of an ecosystem. What is ecosystem? Ecosystem composed of the interaction between population as well as their physical environment. There also include the abiotic and biotic components. The abiotics, which is non-living component of an ecosystem, include the atmosphere, water, and soil. The biotic, living components, can be categorized according to their food source, such as autotroph and heterotroph. Autotroph. Autotroph is organism that require only inorganic nutrients and an outside energy source to produce organic nutrients for their own use and for all of other members of a community. So, producer is one of the autotroph because they can produce food from inorganic nutrients. So, autotroph include the photosynthetic organisms such as land plants and algae, which is known as the photoautotroph. They possess chlorophyll and carry on the photosynthesis in a freshwater and marine habitat. Algae, the example for the aquatic autotroph that make up the phytoplankton load in the most bodies of water. Green plants are the dominant photosynthesizers on land. For the heterotroph, heterotroph is organism that need to preform organic nutrients that they can use as an energy source. So, consumer, heterotroph are also called as consumer because they can consume food that was generated by the producer. So there are 4 things under the heterotroph, which is herbivore, carnivore, omnivore, and detritivores. Herbivore. Herbivore is animal that graze directly on plant or algae. So senang cerita, dia adalah haiwan yang makan tumbuhan lain. So in terrestrial habitat, various insects are small herbivore, antelopes, and bison are the example for the large herbivore. Meanwhile, in the aquatic habitats, zooplankton are the small herbivore, various fishes and manatees is the example for the large herbivore. Moving to the carnivore. Carnivore is feed on other animals, which means haiwan yang makan haiwan lain. So various birds that feed on insects are also known as carnivore. For example, hawks that feed on the birds and small mammals, such as in this diagram. So next is omnivore. Omnivore is animal that feed on both animal and plants, which mean they haiwan yang makan haiwan dan juga makan tumbuhan juga. So for example, chickens, raccoons, and human. So some animals are scavengers, which mean they eat the carcasses of that animal. For example, vultures and jackals. So detritivores is organism that feed on detritus, which consists of the decomposing particle of organic matter. Marine fan worms filter the detritus from the water, whereas the burrowing clams take it from the substratum. For example, earthworm, beetles, termites, and ants. Decomposer. Example for decomposer is bacteria, fungi, and mushroom. So decomposer acquire nutrients by breaking down the dead organic matter, including the animal waste. They perform a valuable service because they release inorganic substances which are taken up by plants once more. Plants would be completely dependent only on physical processes such as release of the mineral rocks to supply them inorganic nutrients. So, this diagram shows all the biotic components of an ecosystem. So, every ecosystem is characterized by 2 fundamental phenomena, which is energy flow and chemical cycling. Energy flow begins when the producer absorbs solar energy. Meanwhile, the chemical cycling begins when the producer takes in inorganic nutrients from the physical environment. So these 2 fundamental phenomena will be presented by the next presenter. So thereafter, via photosynthesis, producers make organic nutrients, food, directly for themselves and indirectly for the other population within the ecosystem. That's all from me. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Fahana Izzati binti Muhammad Anwar and my matrix number is AS11800. Okay, so this is just a basic term about energy flow. So chemical energy of food chain is a main source of ever required by all living organisms. It is transmitted to different trophic levels along the food chain. It is based on two different laws of thermodynamics. So we got two different laws, which are the first one is energy cannot either be created, or nor destroyed. It can only change from one form to another. The second law states that energy is transferred more and more of its waste. So this energy flow in ecosystem. So eventually the energy dissipates into environment as heat. Therefore, the vast majority of ecosystem cannot exist without a continual input of solar energy. Only a portion of organic nutrient made by producers is passed on to consumers because plants use organic molecules to fuel their own cellular respiration. Only a small only a small percentage of nutrient consumed by lower level consumers, such as herbivore, is available to higher level consumers, which are or carnivore. So from this figure, I want to explain a little bit about this figure. A certain amount of food eaten by this giraffe, eaten by herbivore, is not digested and is eliminated as species. Metabolic nitrogenous wastes are excreted as urine. A large portion is used during cellular respiration for the production of ATP and thereafter becomes heat. Only the remaining energy, which is converted into increased body weight or additional offsprings, becomes available to their consumers. So once giraffe ni makan, dia tak digest and dia disingkirkan, dihapuskan sebagai najis lah. So decomposers ni, dia akan convert the organic nutrient seperti glucose back into inorganic chemicals. This one, dia akan convert to inorganic chemicals such as carbon dioxide and water, and then release them to the soil or atmosphere. So once the producers absorb these inorganic chemicals, they have complete their cycle within an ecosystem. Okay, so you guys can turn to page 862. The figure is a food web. So what is a food web? Food web ni sebenarnya nak illustrate siapa makan siapa tu je. So dalam bio-nya ialah food web ni is a natural interconnection of food chain and a graphical representation of what eats what in a ecological community, dalam community ni. So bagi contoh sikit lah. So hawk eats a snake, which has eaten a frog, which has eaten a grasshopper, which has eaten a grass. So macam SPM. Benda sama je. Okay, so there are two types of food web, which are grazing food web and detrital food web. So grazing food web has plants or other photosynthetic organism at its base, followed by herbivore and various carnivore. Detrital food web consists of a base of organisms that feed on decaying organic matter, a dead organism called decomposers. Kasih contoh sikit lah. So the grazing food web ni, grazing food web ni contohnya nuts. Nuts ni dimakan oleh birds kan. So nuts ni provide energy dekat burung ni. Lepas tu dimakan pula oleh hawk. Itu dia. So for detrital food web ni, detritus. This one, fungi and bacteria in detritus ni remain as a dead organism. So diorang ni relate. A large portion of this remain as a grazing food web, illustrated in this figure that I just explained tadi. So the organism in the detrical food web are sometimes fed on by animals in a grazing food web. So seperti robin feed on earthworm. So kita boleh conclude that the grazing food web and the detrical food web are connected to each other sebab diorang ni relate, diorang kan satu community. Okay. So example of energy flow, benda ni macam sama je macam saya cakap tadi, tapi tak apalah. So there are two, grazing food web and detrical food web. So grazing food web ni bermula dengan producer and move through a successive trophic levels. A portion of the energy available in the form of herbivore mice will be transferred to the carnivore snake. The organisms that feed on both the producers and the herbivore are classified as omnivore. So this figure, I talk about this figure actually. So producers dimakan oleh tikus ni, and then the energy will be transferred to snake here, and the energy also will be transferred to the oral ni. They classified as omnivore. So the detrical food web begins with detritus. Detritus ni benda sebenarnya kan? Tak apalah. Detritus ni sebenarnya a dead particulate organic material as distinguished from dissolved organic material. Sebenarnya dia benda yang dah mati, macam tu lah. So they include the bodies of fragment of body dead organism and fecal material. So dia begin dengan detritus yang apa saya cakap tadi. So detritus provide energy to soil organism such as earthworm. Earthworm in turn provide energy to carnivorous invertebrates, which then provide energy to the carnivores. So trophic levels. Trophic levels ni is a level of nutrient within a food web or chain. From figure yang dari dekat slide 862 tu kat media, kita nampak yang green plants produces in the first trophic levels. The animal in the center are the primary consumers and in the second trophic levels, and the last group of animal are the secondary consumers in third trophic levels. Benda sama je dengan apa ni? Benda sama je dengan piramid ni, which is this green plant, and then primary consumers in the second trophic level, third trophic level, fourth trophic level, and so on. So, okay. Ecological pyramid. Ecological pyramid ni apa? So ecological pyramid is a graphical representation of the relationship between the different living organisms at the different trophic levels. When energy is transferred from one trophic level to the other, only 10% from the organic matter is passed on. It is called a 10% rule. 10% rule ni penting tau untuk kira what penting lah. Okay. So pyramid of energy is ecological pyramid that is always upright. Pyramid lah macam biasa. This is because some energy is always lost as heat in each step during the flow of energy from one trophic level to the other. So there are three types of ecological pyramid. Tapi dekat media ni ada satu contoh, which is biomass pyramid. Ni. So this is the example of three types of ecological pyramid. So the first one is pyramid of energy. So pyramid of energy illustrate how much energy is needed as it flows upward to support the next trophic levels. For pyramid of biomass, pyramid of biomass indicate decrease of biomass. Decrease of biomass. Okay. Decrease kan? Okay. Indicates decrease of biomass in each tropical level from base to apex. So the third one is pyramid of numbers. Pyramid of numbers point out the great difference in the number of organisms involved in each step of food chain. Rasanya kita kena tahu pasal kita kena ingat pasal pyramid of biomass kot, sebab dekat media ni ada satu je. Okay. So this is inverted pyramid. Kenapa nama dia inverted pyramid? Sebab piramid kan bentuk dia macam ni tapi dia terbalik. Okay. So kenapa benda ni occurs? Macam mana benda ni occurs? So benda ni terjadi bila the biomass of the herbivore is greater than the biomass of the biomass of herbivore is greater than the biomass of producers. Okay. Benda ni tu jadi bila herbivore lebih banyak daripada producers. So contohnya in aquatic ecosystem such as some lake and open seas, where algae are the only producer, the herbivore may be greater biomass than the producers because the algae are consumed at such a high rate. So we have more herbivore than producers, and that is why we call that this is a inverted pyramid. Okay, thank you.
Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. My name is Muhammad Najwan bin Zarimi. My matrix number is AS12028. In my part, I'll be explaining about subtopic biogeochemical cycle. So, what is biogeochemical cycles? As the term biogeochemical cycle itself, it tells us that this has the involvement of biological, which means life or living, geological, which describes earth or non-living, and chemical, such as the nutrients and chemical compound itself, and the cycles. So if you put together all these four terms, the biogeochemical cycles can be defined as the pathways by which chemicals circulate through ecosystems involve both living and non-living components. So biogeochemical cycle can be classes into two parts, which is gaseous and also sedimentary. In sedimentary, for example, like phosphorus cycle, the chemical is absorbed from the soil by plants' roots, passed to heterotrophs, and eventually returned to the soil by decomposers. And the second part, which is the gaseous cycle, such as carbon and nitrogen cycle, the chemical returns to and is withdrawn from the atmosphere as a gas. To give you a better glimpse or preview about this subtopic, I want to ask all of you some questions that you don't really have to answer. Have you ever wondered how does the producer get the nutrients that they need? So they get the nutrients that they need from the environment, such as carbon dioxide from the air and the nutrients from the soil. And how does the consumer get the nutrients that they need? Is by consuming the producer or eating consumer that eat the producer. How does this matter or these nutrients go back to the environment again through this biogeochemical cycle? So what are the nutrients that we need? If we organize it into four cycles, we need phosphorus, hydrogen and oxygen that make up water, carbon and also nitrogen. Actually, there are other nutrients such as iron, sulfur and calcium, but only these four that only covered in this subtopic. So why do we need all of this matter? We start with water. First, we are filled with water. We also uses oxygen to release energy and also transfer energy. As for phosphorus, phosphorus can be found in our DNA, RNA, and also ATP. Moving on with carbon, carbon is the primary component of micromolecules, which carbon is the building block of. Lastly, nitrogen, which is the big component of protein that make us up. If we don't have all of these nutrients or atom, life cannot exist. Let's go through to the first biogeochemical cycle, which is the water cycle, or can be called as hydrological cycle. There are three processes or ways water can be cycled. The first one is by evaporation from the seawater. So at first, fresh water is distilled from salt water through evaporation causing by the sun's ray. In this state, water changes into gas. After that, condensation will occur in which vaporized fresh water rises up into atmosphere, collects in the form of clouds, cools and falls off as rain. In this state, the gas is converted into liquid. The second one, water can be cycled by transpiration process, which is a process in which water evaporates from plants and then it undergoes the condensation process, same like the evaporation cycle. Next, water also can be cycled through filtration by soils and rocks. Some of the water from precipitation such as snow, rain, and fog makes its way to the ground and saturates the earth to a certain level. Then layers of rock and soil filter this water and this water is called aquifer. We move on to the human activities and the water cycle. So in some parts of the United States, such as arid west and southern Florida, the withdrawal from aquifers, or can be called as groundwater mining, is too excessive. The withdrawal from aquifers exceed the level of recharge, causing the groundwater level to drop, and this can lead to drying up of wells, running out of residents' water supply, and also worsening the water quality. Next, we have the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle can be defined as the circulation of carbon from the atmosphere, biosphere, hydrosphere, and returned back to the atmosphere. First, in biosphere, carbon from the atmosphere enter the terrestrial organism, which in this case is the plant. Plants need carbon dioxide to carry out the photosynthesis process. Next, carbon enters the animal or human when the plants are eaten by them. When these organisms die, the carbon will enter into soil. Second, carbon is cycled through hydrosphere, in which carbon dioxide combines with ocean water to produce bicarbonate ion. This is helpful for the aquatic plants to perform photosynthesis. So how does the carbon is returned back to the atmosphere? When organisms use fire, the carbon will return back to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Carbon also can be returned back to the atmosphere from the fossil fuel, burning of wood, and also from human emission, such as the release of smoke from industries and also vehicles. Uh, Next, we move on to reservoirs hold carbon. Living and dead organisms contain organic carbon, serve as a reservoir for the carbon cycle. The decomposition of organisms return carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere. For the past 300 million years ago, plant and animals were transformed were transformed into coal, oil, and also natural gas, and can be called as fossil fuel. All of this fossil fuel is formed from different type of materials, pressure and also heat. Another reservoir for carbon is the inorganic carbon that accumulates in limestone. So, this limestone is formed from marine organisms that have calcium carbonate shells that remain in sediments long after the organisms have died. This sediment changes into limestone due to the geologic forces that have been applied to them. Let's proceed with human activities and the carbon cycle. Today, the amount of carbon dioxide being released into the atmosphere exceeds the amount of carbon dioxide being removed. This is mainly because the human activities such as destruction of forests and also burning of the fossil fuels, this excess carbon dioxide can lead to the greenhouse effect and also dropping of seawater's pH. The greenhouse effect is caused when other gases are emitted into the atmosphere due to human activities. For example, nitrous oxide from fertilizers and methane from bacterial decomposition. These gases are known as greenhouse gases as they allow solar radiation to pass through but obstruct the escape of heat back into space. These gases are contributing to an overall rise in Earth's temperature, or known as the global warming, which is leading to climate change. You might think that if the carbon dioxide dissolves in the ocean is a good thing because it leaves less carbon dioxide in the air to warm the planet. Well, actually, when carbon dioxide dissolves in seawater, the water becomes more acidic and the ocean's pH will be dropped. Quick change in the ocean's pH doesn't give marine life much time to adapt. Plus, as you can see from the slide, the shells of some animals are already dissolving in more acidic seawater, and that's just one way that acidification may affect ocean life and threatening the marine ecosystem. That's all for me. I'll pass the next presentation to Azhar.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Azhar Zuhairi bin Jumadi, matrix number AS12025, and I will be continuing the presentation. Okay, for today, I'll be presenting about phosphorus and nitrogen cycle. Okay, first of all, the phosphorus cycle. For introduction, phosphorus is a chemical element found on Earth in numerous compound forms, such as the phosphate ion. It is mostly located in water, soil, and sediments. Phosphate levels is important as it influences the size of population within an ecosystem. So we proceed to the phosphorus cycle. Over time, rain and weathering cause rocks to release phosphate ions and other minerals. This inorganic phosphate is then distributed in soils and water. Plants take up inorganic phosphate from the soil. The plants may then be consumed by animals. Animals absorb phosphate by eating plants or plants eating animals. So once the phosphate in the plants or the animals, the phosphate is incorporated into organic molecules such as DNA. When the plant or animal dies, it decays and the organic phosphate will return to the soil. Within the soil, most of phosphorus is locked up in sediments, soil and rocks, so it is not available for plants to use. Organic forms of phosphate can be made available to plants by bacteria. Bacteria will break down organic matters to inorganic forms of phosphorus, and this process is known as the mineralization. So this cycle will continuously to loop throughout the ecosystem. So to make it more understandable, I have prepared a video. So let's watch the video together.
Okay, here I introduce you the phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus moves in a cycle through rocks, water, soil and sediments and organisms. Here are the key steps of the phosphorus cycle. Over time, rain and weathering cause rocks to release phosphate ions and other minerals. This inorganic phosphate is then distributed in soils and water. Plants take up inorganic phosphate from the soil. The plants may then be consumed by animals. Once in the plant or animal, the phosphate is incorporated into organic molecules such as DNA. When the plant or animal dies, it decays and the organic phosphate is returned to the soil. Within the soil, organic forms of phosphate can be made available to plants by bacteria that break down organic matter to inorganic forms of phosphorus. This process is known as mineralization. Phosphorus in soil can end up in waterways and eventually ocean. Once there, it can be incorporated into sediments over time.
So we proceed to the advantages and disadvantages of phosphorus. So phosphorus is an important nutrient for animals and plants. It plays a critical role in cell development and is a key component of molecules that stores energy such as ATP, DNA, and the lipids. So for plants, insufficient phosphorus in the soil can result in a decreased crop yield. That is why people often apply phosphate fertilizers on farmland. So as you can see, phosphorus can be used as fertilizers to decrease the crop yield. So for the advantages, when a field are over-fertilized, phosphate not utilized by plants can be lost from the soil through leaching and water runoff when it rains. So I'll show you a picture. So this is a example of a field, and when it comes to rains, over excess amount of phosphorus will be leaching to this hill and comes to this lake. This phosphate ends in these lakes. Okay, so excess phosphorus causes excessive growth of algae in the lakes. So as you can see, it tends to be like this. This is algae cover the covering the top of the lake surface. So it is also called as algal bloom. This excessive amount of growth of algae, and this will leading to eutrophication. Like this, as you know, eutrophication is a situation where the lake turns into a dead zone, where the content oxygen will drop and the pH of water will change, and living organisms living under the lake will eventually die. So let's continue with nitrogen cycle. For introduction, the nitrogen gas exists in both organic and inorganic forms. Organic nitrogen exists in living organisms, and they get passed through the food chain by the consumption of other living organisms. For inorganic forms of nitrogen are found in abundance in the atmosphere. This nitrogen is made available to plants by symbiotic bacteria, which can convert the inert nitrogen into a usable form such as nitrates and nitrates. Proceed on to nitrogen cycle. Process of nitrogen cycle consists of 5 main steps, which are nitrogen fixation, nitrification, assimilation, ammonification, and denitrification. For nitrogen fixation, the inert form of nitrogen gas is deposit into soils from the atmosphere and surface waters mainly through precipitation. Later, the nitrogen undergoes a set of change in which two nitrogen atoms get separated and combine with hydrogen to form ammonium. So for short, the soil bacteria convert nitrogen into ammonium form. So the entire process is complete by symbiotic bacteria, which are known as Azotobacter and Rhizobium. This bacteria consists of nitrogenase enzyme, which has the capability to combine gaseous nitrogen with hydrogen to form ammonia. Proceed to the next steps, which is nitrification. In this process, the ammonia is converted into nitrat by the presence of bacteria in the soil. Nitrates are formed by the oxidation of ammonia with the help of Nitrosomonas bacterium species. The next step, plants take in the nitrogen compounds from the soil with the help of their roots, which are available in the form of ammonia. Nitrate ion, or ammonium ions are used in the formation of the plants and animal proteins. This way, it enters the food web when the primary consumers eat the plants. So for ammonification, when plants or animals die, the nitrogen present in the organic matter will release back into the soil. The decomposers, namely bacteria or fungi present in the soil, convert the organic matter back into ammonium. This process of decomposition finally will produce ammonia. So for the final step, the nitrogen compounds make its way back into the atmosphere by converting nitrate into gaseous nitrogen. The nitrogen sent back to the atmosphere, while the oxygen was used for cellular needs. So once again, I've prepared a video.
Welcome to Moo Moo Math and Science. In this video, I'd like to talk about the nitrogen cycle. Our atmosphere is made up of 78% nitrogen. We need the nitrogen for our DNA and for proteins, but we just can't breathe in the nitrogen like oxygen. But we must absorb our nitrogen in our food. Nitrogen follows a cycle where it travels from the atmosphere to the soil to animals and back, and in a cycle. Nitrogen in the atmosphere falls to the earth by precipitation, such as rain or snow. Once in the soil, it finds its way to bacteria on the root of plants. At the roots, the nitrogen is combined with hydrogen to make ammonia in a process called nitrogen fixation. Lightning in the atmosphere can also do this. Now, ammonia is toxic, so additional bacteria combines this ammonia with oxygen in a process called nitrification. At this point, the nitrogen is in a form called nitrite. Additional nitrifying bacteria convert this nitrite to nitrate. At this point, plants can absorb this nitrogen in a process called assimilation. However, not all of the nitrate is absorbed, but some of it goes to the bacteria that release the nitrogen to the atmosphere in a process called denitrifying. The nitrogen returns to the atmosphere. Also, once in the animal, after it eats the plants, the animal either dies or needs to get rid of waste. Another type of bacteria then takes this and along with decomposers and breaks this nitrogen either in the waste or the dead animal, and by a process called ammonification, the nitrogen can enter the cycle once again at nitrification, and the cycle continues. I hope that helps with the nitrogen cycle, which is how nitrogen keeps recycling itself. And remember, Moo Moo Math uploads new math, and science video every day. Please subscribe and share.
So hopefully we'll be more understand about nitrogen cycle through that video. So move on to the advantage and disadvantage of nitrogen cycle. For advantage, in the process of ammonium, the bacteria help in decomposing the animal and plant matter, which indirectly helps to clean up the environment. Nitrogen also need to build DNA. You can see it is nitrogen is part of the DNA. So next, nitrogen helps plants to synthesize chlorophyll from the nitrogen compounds. Nitrates and nitrates are released into the soil, which helps to enriching the soils with necessary nutrients required for cultivation. Nitrogen also helps in converting inert nitrogen gas into a usable forms for the plants through the biochemical process. Okay, so for the advantages, the increase of nitrogen in aquatic system can lead to increased acidification in freshwater ecosystem. Next, the increased net of nitrogen will increase in harmful algal blooms. And finally, it will lead to the eutrophication. So that's all from us. Thank you for lending your ears.